All right, guys. So for our next question, I want you to meet a very good friend of mine who served with me on staff at my last church for like 5 days short of forever. This is Dr. Ellen Fox. She is a Christian who happens to be a therapist, and she answers these kinds of questions for people in her office all day, every day, and loves it. And she is way smarter about this than I am. How you doing, Ellen?
I'm doing good, Greg, and man, it's good to see you.
It is good to see you. So I know this one is not going to be hard for you, but I know it will be helpful for our friends in the room. The question is, how can I talk about my depression?
Question sounds so simple, doesn't it? 3 easy steps. Well, one of the things I always think about in regard to depression is I'm always curious about what is the sufferer, how do they perceive, how do they think about, what does being depressed mean to them?
Gotcha.
And that again seems so vague, but we have, if you would, storylines or beliefs. Sort of like when we say, well, I'm a believer. I follow Jesus. I go to that church. We are creating a narrative. People begin to know us by associating us with that. Well, when we think of depression, others have perceptions and ideas, but we have a lot of them inside. And we have many that are false beliefs or just myths. And some are pretty doggone close to the truth, but not truth. So that's one of my thoughts. So my first thought is, man, guys, what are y'all's thoughts about depression? And so if it's reasonable, I guess I would say, if you would, guys, brainstorm with me a moment. What do you guys hear about depression? Could be, what is your favorite, what's your most typical statement you hear about depression? And so, Greg, I'm just going to ask you, just off the wall, tell me something you've heard about depression.
That depression means there's something wrong with you.
Let's park right there and let's figure out, and guys, what I'm doing, and we do this, we think of scripture and it tells us, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Well, we feel a certain way, but we have right under our feelings thoughts, and that directs our behaviors. So depression, meaning something's wrong with me, is that true? Is any part of it true? What isn't true? And what is the truth we replace it with? So is something wrong with you with depression? Well, not wrong as in abnormal, but yes, there is something wrong as in there is considered an illness. We consider depression an illness, not like the common cold. Quite honestly, I think it's a lot tougher than that because you can't see it, you can't feel it. We can't identify a germ and by culture and sensitivity, but it is an illness that affects our feelings and our thoughts and our body as well. The other thing is, there's something wrong with me as a believer. That says volumes, because as a believer, when we say something's wrong with me, and if you were in my office, guys, it'd be easier to say this, but to me, that is a statement indicative of something's bad wrong with me. And as a believer, to us, well, the real bad is we consider sin. Sometimes those with depression think, because I'm the worst, baddest, greatest sinner in the world. And so, is that true? And here's where it gets tricky. In the Genesis account, which for me is absolute truth, the story of creation, that when Adam and Eve chose to sin and God sent them out from the garden, that was the consequence of their sin. He pronounced judgment on them, and one was being sent away. He said suffering and death will be part of your experience in your life forever. Well, suffering is depression. So ever since Adam and Eve chose to sin, depression's been in the world. So if we wonder, does depression mean we have sin? Well, we have a sin nature, even as believers. So that's a lot of words about, is something wrong with me? The biggest thing is, yeah, you got depression and it feels miserable. And good news, there's treatment.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear that it is okay to be a believer and struggle with depression, because that doesn't mean that somehow your relationship with God is broken. It just means that something on the outside of you is pushing in a way that you don't appreciate, right?
I think that's a great way to look at it. It is no more wrong for a believer to have depression than it would be a believer to have a cold
Yeah,
or strep throat or, heaven forbid, when we get COVID.
sure.
These are illnesses that we get.
So when that happens, now that we've kind of set, I think, a really important stage for that, when that happens as a teenager and even going into adulthood, like what is the best way, like the healthiest way to talk about that and to go about getting some help for that?
Well, let me start with how to get some help for it first. Because I think in getting help, you can brainstorm with someone to help you devise a way that is protective and respectful of yourself in the midst of your own suffering. And so getting help, if you think you're depressed, and by diagnosis there's this cluster of symptoms, but if you can't shake this mood, and it doesn't have to be just crying, and it can get better during the day, but if more days than not of a week and 2 weeks you're you're really blue, you are enjoying things like you once were, and there's a host of other symptoms, you get some help. So you tell Greg or your life group leader or a teacher or your parents, and you see your doc. Your doc, for some of you, you may be still seeing pediatricians even to 18, even to 20, but you see your doc and you tell them. That is I think one of the most basic steps to start with, just in case there are other overlapping things that could be part of that. Perhaps you've had really disrupted sleep, or you've had sudden weight loss, or maybe your thyroid levels need to be checked, but you check with your doc. The next thing you do, if your parents are open to it, is see a therapist, see a counselor. Because let me quickly say that in doing those things, seeing a doc and a therapist, or just a doc, or just a therapist, doesn't mean you're going to need to be on meds. So I just want to quickly preface that. We often think of doctors only for medicines, not true. But you see a therapist and talk to them about it. And they will help you respectfully look at what's going on, look at your mood, and help you develop strategies to feel better. Now, in regard to what you tell others, I often think of what we tell others has to do with the relationship you have with them. I think depression, I think all of our suffering, there's a very personal choice about, do we say it or do we not? To your close friends, and it's sort of corny, but man, Jesus' best buds were 12. But I mean, 3, he was tight. And then John was his beloved, and so I pay attention to that. Your dearest friends you can count on, that you could lean into. For them, it's okay to say, man, I've been really struggling and I think I'm depressed. And if you're open to it, ask them to pray for you. I think it's okay to tell them that. The only reason I exert caution is because not everybody, not even in believers, people can sometimes say too much. And so I say, be mindful of who you tell. Tell those people that you can lean into, that you count as dear friends. There may come a time in your life where you look back when you're better and say, people need to know that, people like me, football player, soccer player, cheerleader, great student, just got my license, the world's going great, can get depressed. That's okay. But when you're in the midst of it, I would say your family and your just your very closest friends. Not because it's bad, but it's your business.
There you go. Well, Ellen, we appreciate your insight and your time, and hope that North Carolina isn't freezing you out too much.
Thank you. Hot dog, we had frost this morning. I'm so excited. I'm going to be getting gloves out before I know it, dreaming of snow.
All right. Well, you try and behave, and we will talk to you soon.
I'll do. Bye, guys. Nice meeting you all. See you. And lots of language, but you start talking there's all that stuff about, people say, was it just sin? And I go, well, here's the close to truth. We all,
Exactly. That's why I feel like that deceptively simple question is really,
Loaded.
and with all the things that are going on, even in adults right now with the depression and suicidal thoughts being up 40%, I don't want to treat that one lightly, especially I would never want to, but especially right.
No, and I do think it is always hard. It's about helping people, and I don't often say this again, some things are just easier face to face, but
Yeah.
we talk about don't put your pearls before swine. There's some not everybody is kind to others who suffer.
And not everybody is capable of helping you,
No, no,
even if they
they
care.
do not have the maturation,
Yeah.
empathy, or they don't just understand the magnitude. And quite honestly, the further away from the vine,
Mhm.
if Susie Q tells so and so, by the time the next person gets it, it's trivial, but it's not to the sufferer.
Right.
Um, and that's a tough balance between protecting and feeling shamed and not saying,
Yeah.
but it's protecting.